أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين، الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين، والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرذبية والجود الثقبية والنقابة النقبية والحيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ثم أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا فمنهم ظالم لنفسه ومنهم مقتصد ومنهم سابق بالخيرات بإذن الله، ذلك هو الفضل الكبير. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
For the love of Fatima al-Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى.
For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد.
When one examines those qualities which make Imam al-Husayn unique from amongst all of the A'immah and the prophets, you find that one of the khususiyat and particularities of Imam al-Husayn is that no prophet nor does any successor of any prophet have as many ziyarat as Sayyid al-Shuhada has. Many researchers on this topic, when they counted the number of ziyarat for Sayyid al-Shuhada, they counted that there were more than 25 specific ziyarat for Imam al-Husayn. That on the day of Arafah, there is a ziyarah for Imam al-Husayn. That on the day of Eid, there is a ziyarah for Imam al-Husayn. On the 15th of Sha'ban, there is a ziyarah for Imam al-Husayn. On the night of Qadr, there is a ziyarah for Imam al-Husayn. That what we learn from this is that although the circumstances in our life may change, the ziyarah of Sayyid al-Shuhada is a constant within our spiritual life. And one of the secrets behind this constant mentioning of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the abundance of this ziyarat lies in that line found in many of these ziyarat where we say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. That salam be upon you, O Imam al-Husayn. You are Aba Abdullah, the father of the servants of Allah. You see, amongst the Arabs, there was a tradition that they would give a laqab and a title based upon the name of your oldest son. That Amir al-Mu'mineen was called Abu al-Hasan because his oldest son was Imam al-Hasan. But over here, when it comes to this title, Aba Abdullah, you find many had discussed that if you examine historically, the oldest son of Imam al-Husayn's name wasn't Abdullah. That even if he had a son by the name of Abdullah, as they say is the name of the 6-month child whose title is Ali Asghar, you find he wasn't his oldest son. So they came to the conclusion that this is a title for Sayyid al-Shuhada, that whoever wants to be a servant of Allah and reach the stage of Ubudiyya, Imam al-Husayn is the spiritual father of that individual. That you see, what is a father? When I say Imam al-Husayn is the spiritual father, you find the job of a father is tarbiyah and upbringing. And at the root of this word tarbiyah is the word Rabb and lordship. That's why when the Quran mentions the remembrance of a father, it mentions it alongside the remembrance of Allah. And this is a powerful verse. Allah says, فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَذِكْرِكُمْ آبَاءَكُمْ أَوْ أَشَدَّ ذِكْرًا. That remember Allah how you remember your fathers, or with an even more intense remembering. You see, when we remember our fathers, it's not just an image within our mind, but all of those sentiments associated with our fathers, we remember them. That they are those individuals who took care of us when we had no one. As Imam Zainul Abidin says in Risalatul Hukuk, that he was your root and you are the branch. That whatever goodness you see within your life, the source is your father. Now when we say Imam al-Husayn is Aba Abdullah, our spiritual father, you find that if there is anyone following the deen of Allah and anyone upon that proper path, you find Imam al-Husayn is the source of that guidance. You see, when it comes to ubudiyya and servitude, the Quran says, وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. That worship your Lord. Be a servant until you have attained yaqeen. Over here in the Quran, we find the command verb. A command is given. And when it says, until you've attained yaqeen, the Mufassirun said that yaqeen here means death. That one of the titles of death is certainty, because at the moment of death, everyone is certain. The atheist is certain that he was incorrect. The believer is certain of the realities. But at the same time in this verse, yaqeen can be interpreted to be understood as certainty as well. That is why that one of the steps to show that you're advancing in your certitude is to see if you're advancing in your ubudiyya. The more servitude you have, the more yaqeen you'll have. And the more certainty you have, the more servitude you'll have. That's why when Amir al-Mu'mineen says, لَوْ كُشِفَ لِيَ الْغِدَى مَزْدَدْتُ يَقِينًا, that if all of the veils were removed from the eyes of Ali ibn Abi Talib, it wouldn't increase Ali in yaqeen and certainty. This goes to show that Amir al-Mu'mineen was at the maximum level of ubudiyya and servitude. That he was that individual that when they said, "Oh Ali, do you prefer to be in paradise or do you prefer to be in a mosque?" Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "I prefer to be in a mosque. Because in a mosque, I am seeking the pleasure of Allah. Whereas in paradise, I am there with my own pleasure." So you see that reality of servitude. And when one wants to advance in that servitude, you hold on to the garb of Ahlul Bayt and Sayyid al-Shuhada in particular. You see, tonight we remember that companion of the Imam Hur. When you look at the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada, These are those individuals who understood the Imam as the father of the servants of Allah. I gave you the example of Zuhair from 2 nights ago. He went from opposing the Imam to joining the Imam in one conversation. And tonight we remember that individual who stopped the army of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You know, when he stops the army of the Imam, he comes with 1,000 soldiers. An appointed comes, he grabs the rein to the horse of Imam al-Husayn. You know what the Imam does at that moment? The Imam is that individual who would spiritually elevate all those who are around him. The Imam says, Taki latka ummuk ma turid. He says, may your mother cry over you. What do you want from me at this moment? And you know what Hur says right there? He says, Ama wallah, lo kana ghayruka min al-Arab yaquluha li wa huwa ala al-hal allati anta alayha ma taraktu dhikra ummihi bittakal an aqulahu kainan man kan. Hur says that if anyone from amongst the Arabs had said such a thing to me, that may your mother weep over you, I would have said the same thing about their mothers, no matter who it was. But you know what Hur says after that? He says, Walakin wallah, mali ila dhikri ummika min sabil illa bi ahsani ma yuqdaru ilayh. He says, except for the fact that the only thing I have is the best of mention for your mother, Fatima. You see, Imam al-Husayn, by allowing Hur to remember who his mother was, he spiritually elevates Hur. And what is the status of the ashab of Sayyid al-Shuhada? There's one tradition found in the work Ilal al-Shara'i, that when they come to Imam al-Sadiq, they say, O Imam, akhbirni an ashab al-Husayn wa ala ikdamihim ala al-maut. That inform me about the state of the companions of Imam al-Husayn as they would approach their death. You know what the Imam says about them? Imam al-Sadiq, he says, Innahum kushifa lahumul ghita. That same line Amir al-Mu'mineen used. That at that level, it is saying that for them, these individuals, the veil was removed حَتَّى رَأَوْا مَنَازِلَهُمْ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ until they saw their status in paradise. These individuals who grabbed onto the garb of Sayyid al-Shuhada, they attained this reality. You know, Imam Zainul Abidin or Imam Muhammad al-Baqir would say, that these are those individuals that on the day of Ashura, when the arrows went into their body, they didn't feel pain upon that day. And you know, I remember I gave the explanation to this tradition from this minbar. But as a means of a reminder, you see, what does this mean? Does this mean that that pain was taken away from their body? Does that mean the human condition was taken away from them? You find the Quran explains this reality. In the story of Yusuf, that when the women of Misr began to make fun of Zulaykha for being seduced by Yusuf, Zulaykha got tired of those claims by these women. So you know what Zulaykha does? She has a gathering within her home, and she calls all of these women. She places fruit in front of them, and she gives them knives. The Quran says that as they were eating, Zulaykha calls Yusuf. And the moment Yusuf comes, they begin to look at the beauty of Yusuf. And they were so mesmerized. فَقْتَ أَيْدِيَهُنَّ. They began to cut their hands. And the Quran says they didn't realize it. I say, what is the beauty of Yusuf? What is the beauty of Sayyid al-Shuhada? That these are those ashab who saw the spiritual beauty of Hussain. That they are the ones who were so immersed, they didn't feel that pain on the day of Ashura, according to the tradition. And it is because they recognized the Imam as Aba Abdullah. And this is why, for us, it's important to hold on to Sayyid al-Shuhada in any manner possible. And one of those institutions and acts that allow us to do so is the recitation of ziyarah. You see, when it comes to the hadith of Ahlul Bayt, oftentimes in the hadith there are some limitations. Why? Because the imams are speaking at the level of the people. The hadith says, تَكَلَّمَ النَّاسَ عَلَى قَدْرِ أُقُولِهِمْ. So in the traditions, we find that sometimes the imams give different answers. For example, when an atheist comes to Imam as-Sadiq and he says, can the world be put inside an egg without the egg being bigger or the world becoming smaller? Can Allah do such a thing? The Imam replies to that man by saying, that tell me, what do you see around you? He says, I see the trees, and I see these houses, and I see the river, and I see all of these different things. The Imam says, what do you use to see it? He says, I use my eye. The Imam says, be more specific. He says, there is a particular part of my eye. The Imam says, how big is that part? He says, it is only the grain of a lentil, maybe even smaller. The Imam says, if all of that can be seen within your eye without your eye being bigger or the world smaller, do you think Allah cannot make the reality of the world in an egg in that manner? But you find the Imam, he answered according to the level of that man. But when another man who was more intellectually inclined came, the Imam revealed more of a reality. He said, Allah can, but the objects don't have the properties themselves to do so. Meaning your question is flawed. So the point I'm making is that these individuals, many of them, they didn't have that level to understand the hadith. After all, when Amir al-Mu'mineen sat on the mimbar, and he said, Saluni, Saluni, qabla an tafkiduni, inni a'rafu bi turuq as-sama'i min turuq al-ardi, that I know the path of the heavens better than the earth. What did they ask Amir al-Mu'mineen? They did not ask about the realities of the heavens and the earth. The man says, how much hair is upon my head or upon my beard according to another tradition? Amir al-Mu'mineen looks at that man. He says, even if I told you, who would be there to count and confirm for you? But what I will tell you is that for every hair is a shaitan. Because that son in your house, he's speaking to Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, your son will be the killer of my Hussain. You see, these are the people the Imams were surrounded by. So in the hadith, they spoke at their level. But when I say, when you come to ziyarat, who is addressing who? An imam is addressing an imam. That limitation isn't there. Within the ziyarat, we see the virtues of Ahlul Bayt glimmering at the forefront. And amongst those ziyarat, one of the most famous ziyarat is ziyaratul waritha. You see, when you look at the ziyarah literature, there are some ziyarat which are amma and some which are khasa. There are certain ziyarat that you recite them on a particular day or they're for a particular occasion. But there are certain ziyarat that they are so powerful and they are so general that no matter which place you are, no matter what time in your life it is recommended for you to recite that ziyarah. And from amongst those ziyarat is ziyaratul waritha. Because this is that ziyarah that when Safwan bin Jamal comes to Imam as-Sadiq and he says, oh Imam, give me a ziyarah that no matter which shrine I'm at, no matter where I am, I can recite it. The Imam says, go and say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam safwatillah. Go and say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Nuhin Nabiyallah. And indeed tonight, when it comes to the ziyarah which you recite on a night like this, there is one question that I want to answer as the subject of tonight's majlis. And that is that question, that when we say Imam al-Husayn is the inheritor of these anbiya, what is Imam al-Husayn inheriting from them? That what is the Imam inheriting from Adam and Nuh and Musa and Ibrahim and Isa and Rasulullah? And what is that reality? Because the moment we understand this reality, you find that this recitation of this ziyarah will have a more potent spiritual effect within our lives. The Imams, they say, Hadithun tadrihi khayrun min alf tarwihi. That one tradition of ours that you understand is better than 1,000 that you just narrate. Because when you understand that tradition, it's not just the words which are within your mind, but you have ma'rifah of the Imam. And to understand this discussion of what is Imam al-Husayn inheriting, the first question is that what is inheritance? You see, when it comes to inheritance, there are two words which are used. Oftentimes it is called mirat, and oftentimes it is called irth. And when you look in the Quran uses the word Torah sometimes to describe the first and sometimes to describe the second. So the question comes up is that what is the difference between the two? For example, in Surah Al-Fajr, the Quran says, وَتَأْكُلُونَ التُّرَاثَ أَكْلًا لَمَّا. That they eat that inheritance without checking. Meaning, if it belongs to them, they take it. If it doesn't belong to them, they will take it regardless. And what we understand from this is that irth is more general. Irth is something you take from your father, but mirat has conditions. And the moment you understand these conditions, you'll understand what is Sayyid al-Shuhada taking. The first condition of mirat is that it is not necessary that it is from one person. When you say this individual has the bravery of this tribe, or he has the generosity of this nation, the fact that you're mentioning that this quality comes from a group goes to show that it is mirat. Otherwise, if it was from one person, it is irth. But the second quality of mirat is that it continues. You know, in the olden societies, it was a tradition that they would put henna upon the beards. And nowadays, it's not as common anymore. The fact that it's not practiced anymore shows that it is not mirat. Because it has to be active, it has to be continuing. When we say Imam al-Husayn is warithul anbiya, that mirat must exist from the time of those prophets to the time of Sayyid al-Shuhada and to the successor of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You see this line of Imam al-Husayn being the warith of these anbiya, it's not just exclusive to Imam al-Husayn. We find this line in the ziyarah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. We find this line in the ziyarah of the A'imma in Samara. We find this line in the ziyarah of the Imams of Qadmain. But what makes it unique to Sayyid al-Shuhada is that never has this line been repeated as much for any other Imam except Imam al-Husayn. That there is something in the life of Sayyid al-Shuhada that he manifested this inheritance more than any other Imam. And when we come to understanding what is this inheritance, you find in reality there are 4 things which the Imam inherits from these Anbiya. The first of those 4 inheritances of the Imam is what is called al-miratul maddi. That there is a material inheritance that the Imam, he takes from these Anbiya. You see, these prophets of God had a tradition that their relics, which were of great importance, they would pass it to the next prophet. The next prophet who would come would pass it to the following one. Eventually, it would reach Rasulullah, who would give it to Amir al-Mu'mineen, who would give it to Imam Hassan, who would give it to Imam Hussain. Then what are these relics? You find in one tradition, a companion by the name of Sa'id ibn Sammam, he comes to Imam al-Sadiq. And he says to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. He says to the Imam, O Imam, I met 2 individuals who were of a Zaydi inclination. You see, the Zaydi were a group who believed in imamat. But their imamat had the concept that the imam must be qa'imun bis-sayf. He must have an uprising. And Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Sadiq didn't. So this companion says, is that they say that Zayd al-Shaheed is the imam. Oh, Ja'far al-Sadiq, are you the imam or is Zayd the imam? The imam, he replies by saying, I am the imam. He says, how can this be proven? He says, one of the signs of the A'immah is they have that mirat and that inheritance from the previous Anbiya. He says, oh Imam, explain yourself further. He says, Indi suyufu Rasulillah. That with me are the swords of the Prophet. And with me is the shirt of the Prophet. And with me is the tablet of Musa. And with me is the asa of Musa. And with me is the shirt of Yusuf. And with me is the ring of Sulaiman. And with me is the tabut of Banu Israel, which was a sign of Nabuwah. You see, across the religious traditions of the world, no religious tradition has talked about this tabut except for the Shias. It's only within the Shi'i hadith is the location of that tabut al-Shakina, as it's called, where it is with Ahlul Bayt. You know, on the day when Amir al-Mu'mineen was appointed the Khalifa, it stated upon that day, when Amir al-Mu'mineen, he comes and he goes towards the mimbar. The hadith, they say that on that day, Amir al-Mu'mineen wears the shirt of Ibrahim. And he wears the amama and the turban of Rasulullah and the cloak of Rasulullah. On his hand was the ring of Sulaiman, in his hand was the asa of Musa. Now as they're watching Amir al-Mu'mineen with that entire tabut al-Sakina going towards the mimbar, they found that there was a tradition. Each of the khulafa would sit one step lower. The first would sit one step lower from Rasulullah. The second would sit one step lower from the first. The third one step lower from the second. Now Ali is going towards the mimbar. They think Amir al-Mu'mineen is going to follow their sunnah. But you know what Amir al-Mu'mineen does? He places his foot where the third would sit. Then he places his foot where the second would sit. Then he places his foot where the first would sit, and he sits where Rasulullah would sit. Then at that moment, Amir al-Mu'mineen says that upon this day, Haqq has returned back towards its position. You see, it's written within the works. Go and read the works of Tabari and Baladuri. On that day, the companions of Rasulullah would say, now we are reminded of the time period of Rasulullah. So you see all of these relics, they were with Ahlul Bayt. That when we want to understand the inheritance of Imam al-Husayn, the first level of inheritance was this material inheritance. And each of these relics, although they have an outer form, you find that they signify an inner spiritual reality. One of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq by the name of Mufaddal, he says, "Oh Imam, what is the shirt of Yusuf?" The Imam says, the shirt of Yusuf was the shirt of Ibrahim, which when Ibrahim was thrown in the fire, Jibreel brings that shirt to Ibrahim, and the moment he places that shirt, the fire becomes bardan wa salama, it becomes cool and tranquility. That this shirt, it represented that tranquility. You know, it's stated in Surah Yusuf, when Yusuf goes blind, and when Yaqub goes blind, and in the story you find that Yusuf, he becomes the economic minister. The brothers, they go to Yusuf. When they tell Yusuf of Yaqub and his blindness, what does Yusuf say? He says, فَذْهَبُوا بِقَمِيسِ هَذَا وَأَلْقُوهُ عَلَى وَجْهِ أَبِي يَأْتِي بَصِيرًا. That take the shirt of mine, place it on the face of my father, the vision of my father will return. You know, I asked one question. Is Yaqub a prophet of God? Isn't the dua of a prophet of God mustajab and accepted? Yaqub could have prayed to Allah, Allah would have given him his vision back. But you find any relic which is associated with a Nabi or the successor of a Nabi can give shafa'ah. Thus, why do they ask that why is it that you go towards Karbala to gain shafa'ah? So you find that this reality is there. That this was the first level of the inheritance of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The second level of what Imam al-Husayn inherits from these Anbiya is what is called al-Mirat al-Ruhani, a spiritual inheritance. You see, all of those spiritual quwwat and abilities which were with the Anbiya or with the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. When the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا عِيسَى ibn Maryam al-Bayyinat وَأَيَّدْنَاهُ بِرُوحِ الْقُدُسِ, that when we gave Isa the signs that manifested and we supported him with the Ruh al-Qudus. If the Quran says this reality is for Isa, then this reality must be for Sayyid al-Shuhada. But at the second level, all of the virtues of the Anbiya are within Imam al-Husayn and they are in their perfection within Imam al-Husayn. You see, when you read this ziyarah doesn't just say, Assalamu alayka ya warita Adam. It doesn't say, Ya warita Nuh. After each prophet, it gives an attribute. It is teaching us that when we study the lives of the awliya of Allah, our job is not just to study their names, but it is to study their attributes. After all, on the day of Khaybar, Rasulullah could have said, tomorrow I'm giving the alam and the flag to Ali ibn Abi Talib. But what does Rasulullah say? He says, لَأُعْتِيَنَّ الرَّايَةَ غَدًا رَجُلًا كَرَّارًا وَغَيْرِ فَرَّارٍ يُحِبُّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيُحِبُّهُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. He gave us the qualities of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, the one who will take my alam, the first sign is that he will be a rajul and a true man. The second is he'll be brave. The third is he doesn't run away. The fourth is he loves Allah and His Prophet, and Allah and His Prophet love him. You see, anyone who goes to any other doorstep for spirituality, I say, give me one place within the hadith where the spirituality of a man is so verified on the tongue of Risalat that Rasulullah says this man is beloved by Allah and His Prophet and he loves Allah and His Prophet. Nowhere will you find that reality except at the door of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So when you look at the ziyarah, each of these prophets, a quality has been mentioned. When it says, Assalamu alayka ya warita Adam safwatillah, that Adam, you are that choice of Allah. You know what safwa is? When you boil milk, at the top a layer of cream comes up. In Urdu they call it malai. I don't know what they call it in other languages. But that top, you find they would call it safwa in Arabic. The reason Adam is called safwatullah is that out of all of the malaika in that presence, Adam is the one who was chosen for sajda to be done towards. That he was that choice of Allah. You find that there must be some quality in Sayyid al-Shuhada resembling this reality. No, when we say Assalamu alayka ya warita Nuhin Nabiyullah, that Nuh was that prophet of Allah. When we study the life of Nuh, there must be some resemblance to Sayyid al-Shuhada. That if Nuh has an ark, we find Hussain was called Safinatun Najat within the traditions. But there is a difference between the ark of Nuh and the ark of Hussain. To board the ark of Nuh, you had to be there at that time and at that place. The door of Hussain is that door which is open for any hur that wants to come in humility. You know, doesn't the tradition say that Hussain is Misbahul Huda wa Safinatun Najat? But I'll give you one more tradition. When they come to Imam Sadiq, they say, Oh Imam, why is it that this is said about your grandfather Hussain? All of you Ahlul Bayt are the arks of salvation. You know what the Imam says? He says, كُلُّنَا سُفُنَ النَّجَاةِ. Allahu Akbar. All of us, Ahlul Bayt, are the arcs of salvation. وَلَكِنْ سَفِينَةَ جَدِّيَ الْحُسَيْنِ أَوْسَى وَأَسْرَى. But the ark of my grandfather Hussain is the one that moves the fastest, and that is the one which is the widest. Because the story of Sayyid al-Shuhada, if you just study the movement of the Imam from Medina towards Karbala, even if you don't believe in a religion, you would say that if there is a religion upon this earth, the religion of Hussain is the best of religions. That every movement of the Imam was so calculated to elevate a human being. There was an individual by the name of Turrama. It's stated that this individual, when he comes to the Imam on this journey, the Imam says that, come and join me. Turrama says, oh Imam, I'll join you, but my family lives in the desert, and I have to go and give them food. You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, go, and then join me. The Imam doesn't say you were forced to stay. And the maqatil differ. Some of them say he was martyred in Karbala, and others, they say that he had arrived in Karbala late. But look at the thought of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Imam al-Husayn could have just said to him, go and live with your family. The Imam knew they would be martyred. But the Imam wanted this individual to enjoy that eternal paradise. He wanted to elevate this man to the status that when you address the companions of Imam al-Husayn, you say, Assalamu alaikum ya ansara deen Allah. That, oh companions of Hussain, you're not just the companions of Hussain. You are the supporters of the deen of Allah. No, that's not it. Assalamu alaikum ya ansara Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya ansara Amir al-Mu'mineen. Assalamu alaikum ya ansara Fatima Sayyidati Nisa'il Alameen. Assalamu alaikum ya ansara Abi Muhammad al-Hasan ibn Ali al-Zaki al-Nasir. Assalamu alaikum ya ansara Abi Abdullah. That, oh companions of Hussain, not only are you Imam Hussein's companions, you are Rasulullah's companions. You are Amir al-Mu'mineen's companions. You are Fatimatul Zahra's companions. You are Imam al-Hasan's companions. And you know what the next line in the ziyarah is? You know, I wish I had an explanation for this next line. We say, Bi abi antum wa ummi. That may my mother and my father be sacrificed for you. That who is saying this line? Imam Sadiq is saying this line. Who is the father of Imam Sadiq? The father of Imam Sadiq is an Imam. And Imam is saying, may my father who is an Imam be sacrificed for you, O Ansar Hussain. Tibtum wa tabat al-ardu allati fiha dufintum. That blessed are you and blessed is that earth where you're buried. You see how Sayyid al-Shuhada would seek to elevate these companions. That even the 12th Imam, when he goes to ziyarah, do you not think that the son of Fatima sends his salams upon the companions of Sayyid al-Shuhada? This is that Hussain. That when each prophet was given a test, not all of them went to the maximum effort to invite their people. They did everything in the best of their capacities. They were ma'soom, they were infallible. But you find that this is the son of Rahmatul lil Alameen. This is the one who would elevate these individuals because these spiritual qualities were at the maximum within Sayyid al-Shuhada. So we find this is the second level of inheritance. The third level of the inheritance of Sayyid al-Shuhada, after the material inheritance from the Anbiya, and after the spiritual inheritance from the Anbiya, is that the Imam has a continuation of their wilayah. You see, Imama is a continuation of Risala. And that wilayah, it continues. Whether it is wilayah in law, whether it is wilayah in creation. Some may say, how is it possible that Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam can have control over the creation by the will of Allah? I say in the Quran, when it says, وَسُخِّرَ Sulaiman, that Sulaiman had control of the winds, and Isa could bring the dead back to life, and Musa hits his asa on the ground and the water it spills in half. You find, is Hussain not the inheritor of Musa? Is Hussain not the inheritor of Ibrahim and Isa and each of these Anbiya? You'll find all of those realities are there. You see, sometimes people think that what is the ability of the A'immah? You find the ulama are able to show some of these realities. There was a famous alim from Najaf. He goes towards India, and here's in India, there was a yogi over there, that he was a spiritual person. And he says to that yogi, when he meets him in India, that what are you able to do? He says, you see those goat over there, that flock of goat? I am able to make them die by the power of my spirit. He does such a thing. Then he says to that alim, what are you able to do? He says, I am able to bring them back to life. He says, even I can't do that. What is your secret? He does it in front of him. He says that, how are you able to do this spiritual practice? That alim says to that yogi. He says, I stay away from sweets and I sleep in this manner, and he gives a long list. You know what that alim says? He says, I do it by eating sweets. I do it by sleeping in the opposite manner. He goes down the list and he says, everything is the opposite. But he says, there are two things I have in my life. The first is whatever my deen has made haram, I stay away from it. And what Allah has allowed, I go towards it. The second is I have belief in the wilayah of my master Ali ibn Abi Talib. So you find this is that reality. So on the first level, when Ahlul Bayt have that material inheritance from the Anbiya, and they have that spiritual inheritance from the Anbiya at the second level, you find the third is wilayah, and the fourth and final inheritance of Sayyid al-Shuhada is the musibah and the difficulties of the Anbiya. You see, each prophet would build into the message of the next prophet. Adam to Nuh, Nuh to Ibrahim, Ibrahim to Isa, Isa to Rasulullah. But you find as time would go on, difficulties would increase more and more, to the point that Rasulullah says, no prophet was oppressed like I, Rasulullah. That how was Rasulullah oppressed? It's stated that when Rasulullah goes to Taif, and he begins to preach to the people, those people, they begin to throw rocks at Rasulullah. And when they begin to throw rocks at Rasulullah, you find the Prophet of God begins to bleed from his feet, from his forehead towards his feet. But even at that moment, Rasulullah says, oh Allah, guide these people, for they didn't know. When he would return home, the Prophet wasn't concerned about this blood upon his body. He was concerned that what will my daughter Fatima say when she sees me in such a state? I say, oh Rasulullah, that this is only that blood upon your body. What would Fatima Zahra say if she saw a Hussain in Karbala? You see, that Hussain who inherited the musibah of the Anbiya. Ibrahim, when he had to slaughter Ismail, it's stated in the traditions that Ibrahim had a blindfold on his eye. It's stated in the traditions that Ismail turned his cheek away from his father. So a father didn't have to see his son at that moment. It's stated in the traditions Hajra wasn't watching the mother of Ismail. But I say on the day of Ashura, how did Hussain go to the body of Ali Akbar on that day? That this is that musibah of Hussain. You know, one great musibah amongst the stories of the Anbiya was the musibah of Ayub. Ayub was tested with everything, that his children had passed away. His wealth was taken away from him. But when they said to Ayub, "Oh Ayub, what was the most difficult test?" He says, "It was when my companions had left me." You see, that was that most difficult moment when other prophets would beg their companions to come to them. The ashab of Hussain were those individuals the Imam would say, "Leave, your responsibilities are fulfilled." And amongst those companions, we honor Hurr ibn al-Yazid al-Riyahi upon this night. You see, the story of Hurr is that story which inspires each of us. Because Hurr had showed us that no matter what we've done in our life, the door of repentance is open. Because at the end of the day, no matter what sin we didn't stop Imam al-Husayn in Karbala. But what is the generosity of Imam al-Husayn? You know, when the army of Hurr stops Imam al-Husayn, they were near the land of Karbala at an area called Du Husum. But before they got to Du Husum, the Imam told his ashab that whatever water you normally take extra water. The companions say, "Oh Master, why should we take extra water?" It's stated when the Imam reaches that land of Du Husum, when the army of Hurr comes, it's stated there were 1,000 people in the army of Hurr. The companions began to say, "Oh Imam, at this moment, if we take them, more people won't come. It's only 1,000 people." But the Imam, he shows his generosity. He says, "No, never will Hussain start the battle." That even on the day of Ashura, if the first arrow was fired, it was fired from the side of Umar bin Sa'ad. But it's stated that when the army of Hurr came, there was no water with them. They were thirsty. It's stated within the traditions, if you want to understand Sayyid al-Shuhada, he says, "Oh my companions, don't just give them water, but give their camels and their horses water." I say, "Oh Hussain, these individuals who would deny you water, you're even thinking of the horses of these individuals." There was one man upon that day, his name was Ali ibn al-Ta'an al-Muharibi. Listen to this tradition. It's stated that Ali ibn al-Ta'an says that the entire army of Hurr had reached that land. But I had come later. When I had come later, I had become so weak that I couldn't even walk. In the distance, I saw a man come towards me. That man, when he saw me, he picks up the water bag, he places it by my mouth, and with his hands he gives me water. After that incident, I said to the army of Hurr, I said, "Oh my people, who was that man?" They said that is Hussain ibn Ali. He says, "This is that Hussain who we've come to oppose." This was Sayyid al-Shuhada. That man would oppose the Imam. The Imam with his hands gives water. He shows that only the one with the blood of Ali ibn Abi Talib can do this. That when Amir al-Mu'mineen was struck by Ibn Muljim, the Imam says, lighten the ropes upon his arm. Make sure you give water towards that individual. That in Karbala, this is the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Hurr, he stops the army of Sayyid al-Shuhada. But you find that's not where the thought of Hurr it stops. That on the night before Ashura, Hurr would look towards the army of Umar bin Sa'ad, and he would look towards the army of Imam al-Husayn. On one side, you would hear the recitation of the Quran, but you know what the second thing that Hurr would hear? He would hear the cries of the children when they would say, "Wa'atasha, wa'atasha," that thirst at that moment. Hurr, he begins to walk, he begins to look worried. One of the individuals in the army of Umar bin Sa'ad says, "Oh Hurr, if somebody had asked me who is the bravest from our army, I would say it is you, oh Hurr." Hurr says, "Oh man, I'm not worried about the battle, But on this night, I find myself in between heaven and hell. It's stated that as the time of morning it came, he begins to go to the outskirts of the tents. As he's going towards the outskirts of the tents, he takes his son, he takes his servant, and according to some traditions, he takes his brother with him. But he says towards his servant, "Oh, my servant, before I go towards Hussain, make sure you tie my arms, because these arms are the ones that grab the horse of Sayyid al-Shuhada. These arms are the one which stop the horse of Imam al-Husayn in Karbala. When he goes towards the Imam. He says, "Oh Master, halli min at-tawbah, that is there any forgiveness for Hur?" The Imam says, "Oh Hur, you have been forgiven. Allah has forgiven you, O Hur." But after that, Sayyid al-Shuhada, he says, "Oh Hur, forgive me." I say, "Oh Imam, Hur is the one who stopped you. Why are you saying, 'Forgive me, O Hur'?" You know what the Imam says, if you want to understand the karam of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Sayyid al-Shuhada says, "Oh Hur, on this day you've come as my guest, O Hur. Oh Hur, I'm from the household of Ahlul Bayt. We are the household of generosity. Oh Hur, I don't have any water to offer you. Forgive me on this day, O Hur." When Hur, he comes to the army of Sayyid al-Shuhada, you see, there's one thing that was on the mind of Hur. Hur wanted to feel the pain of sacrificing his son in the path of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He says to the Imam, "Oh Imam, allow my son to be the first sacrifice." The Imam gives permission. You know, when the son of Hur goes to fight on the battlefield, a point it comes when the son of Hur is surrounded from all sides. قَتَلُوهُ irban irba. When he falls towards the ground, he sends his salams upon his father. When Hur goes towards his son, what does he see? He sees the head of his son in the lap of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The Imam says, "Oh Hur, don't look at this scene, oh Hur. An old father shouldn't have to see his son, oh Hur." I say this was before Dhuhr. A time would come when Ali Akbar is upon the ground. Sayyid al-Shuhada would go to the body of Ali. You find that the body of the son of Hur is taken towards the tent. As the body of the son of Hur is taken towards the tent, that moment it comes. Hur, he goes towards the battlefield. Hur begins to fight. As he's in the middle of the battlefield, you find their arrows and their swords, they go towards the body of Hur. That point it comes that Hur, he falls on the ground. You know, when each of these companions would fall, there was only one call they would make. They would say, "Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah." It's stated in the traditions, Imam al-Husayn comes, Habib ibn Mudahir comes, Muslim ibn al-Awsaja comes. But when he looks at Habib, he looks at Muslim, he says, "Oh Habib, oh Muslim, I have one wasiyah, that as long as you are alive, don't let an arrow go to the body of Hussain." I say, "Oh Hur, a time would come after Asr, the Imam will be alone, arrow after arrow towards the son of Fatima. But one arrow would come, Hurmala would fire that arrow, the chest of Hussain would fall towards the..." ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Ya Allah, we say on this night, to the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Ya Allah, grant us the opportunity for the ziyarah of Ahlul Bayt. Grant us the shafa of Ahlul Bayt. Ya Hussain, Ya